Check, check. We are live. Hey, podcast listening people. Hope you're having a fantastic day over there. Those of you that are listening, those of you that are watching, doing a short, quick podcast episode and stand by because, man, I can tell you we have some very, very high level and exciting podcast guests that we're bringing onto the show here soon. So make sure you're subscribed. You can also listen to the podcast on the go on all your favorite podcast apps. And I want to dive into a session that I had the privilege of hosting earlier today. I may actually be streaming this the following day, so it might be Thursday, Friday, but we did a CMO Alliance session with a handful of high-level CMOs, marketers, and all of us decided to get together as part of the CMO Alliance network and talk about podcasts, one of my favorite subjects. So they asked me to host it. It was a really good time, lots of great connections, but a few questions and thoughts came up out of that session that I thought would be really great. And, ironic enough, we do a session about a podcast, and then here I am. I'm going to hop onto our podcast and actually talk about it. There's a lot of misconception of what it is to start a podcast, to grow a podcast, to launch a podcast, and what it even is you're trying to accomplish with developing or leveraging a podcast for B2B sales, business to business. We're talking to high level executives, business leaders, whether you're selling into the IT suite, the financial, the HR, executives, CEOs, COOs, you name it. Podcasting is extremely powerful. One of the questions that actually came up is, and I wrote some of these down earlier, and I thought these would be helpful for you, is how do you actually assess and measure the effect and impact of a podcast? And I think this is a phenomenal question and also a very challenging one because it's very similar to content, right? And doing lots and lots of content marketing, whereas people may be seeing you. Let's say you're doing a content ABM strategy and campaign on LinkedIn. You're putting out some very specific content around that arena. There's prospects that are watching you. They're learning. They may be reading, but they may never like your content. They may never show a sign that they're there, but they're consuming it, and or they're potentially consuming it through word of mouth. Another executive in the company sees the content you're putting out. They grasp onto it. They know it's an internal challenge. They forward it over to the decision maker that you're trying to get in touch with. And ultimately that turns into interest, high level, and then getting follow-up touches and nurturing them down the pipeline to eventually converting into a prospect. And a podcast is very, very similar. The difference and the nuance of leveraging podcasts for ABM, account-based marketing, one, obviously content, we've talked about this a lot, is currency. Whether you're doing paid ads, conferences, trade shows, word of mouth, referrals, you're doing outbound, your sales team is reaching out. At the heart of it, it's one thing to be able to reach your prospects, but on the other hand, you have to have the power to consistently stay in front of them. They say the average sales touch point is like 13 touches. I believe it's much, much higher than that because there's a lot of those touches that you can't see and you can't always effectively measure. And so on that, podcasting and the content, right? The video clips, the articles, the write-ups, the relationship is what allows you to feed into that pipeline. I've had many number of prospects who start talking to someone. Maybe there's a 3-month, 6-month, a year-long sales cycle. And all the while, instead of just simply us talking about how great we are, just putting generic content out there, we're leveraging the peers of our prospects to further nurture them and provide the insights as to why what we're doing is the most logical choice for them as a vendor and as a strategy to move forward with. And so all that content that you're getting out of it, number one, is going to feed everything else you're doing. Number two, the connections and relationships that you're getting out of that as well. So I can reach out to almost anybody and leverage past podcast guests that we've had to get them to agree to being on the podcast. And from that, we get to build a relationship, build a connection, and that in itself could turn into business opportunities. So it's much more dynamic than simply just putting content out there, but the ability to tap into your influencers in your market and prospects. And that is the third one, is the influencers, and leveraging that as part of, hey, how do we get a return on this? Well, we find the top influencers in our space. We offer them to come on our podcasts, and in exchange, we're going to provide them with a lot of great personal branded thought leadership content that's coming from their voice, and empower them to spread that awareness of the podcast interview through their email list, to share on social, to place on their social sites, to place on their website. In turn, is giving our company more exposure to their audience of our prospects. Does that make sense? So using that is almost like a PR campaign or an exposure campaign, but probably a fraction of the investment that it would take, and getting, them the feel to feed it out, get it out. You're the one driving it forward. 9 out of 10 people are going to say yes because they want to help others. They want to provide value. They want to support their peers, and your prospects out there, they want to learn from their peers, and they want to learn from those who are recognized, have credibility that you may not have, but you can borrow that credibility via the platform of a podcast. So that is called borrowed credibility. Another great question that came up is, how do we actually go about starting the podcast? How do we actually go about launching a show? And there's probably 500 different answers for this. The simplest one, and me, just even having this experience, is to get started, you have to just get started. And before you actually go in, develop a whole platform, find out your show, you can take micro steps to actually launching a podcast, because no matter how much you do in the very beginning, your podcast is always going to evolve over time. And so you can start by creating a mini podcast, doing interviews that are strictly video, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Use a platform like what I'm using right here, StreamYard. You can interview folks and start with those that are already in your network, which will bring me to my third question that we talked about quite a bit. But starting within your network. So an existing client of yours, an existing relationship, potentially influencer within your network that you already have a relationship with, and then somebody internally to your team. That'll give you a whole quarter's worth of podcasts, because I would recommend, if you're going to do it, start with one a month. Start with one a month. 95% of podcasts that start don't make it past episode 7. Start with one a month, get it to work, and then scale it. If you find 3 identified people within your network to start and launch that show, then you can do that. And then you can make the twist on. Then you can kind of figure out, what is the angle here, right? What area, what's going to work in terms of the music, the theme, like what's the kind of vibe when we're actually doing this, depending on who's the host and depending on who we're interviewing. And third, in terms of like, who are we interviewing, who's the host, is do not outsource your guest outreach, especially in the very beginning. Someone brought that up, that they had actually outsourced someone and contracted somebody to go and reach out to potential guests. They're just getting the wrong people. didn't make sense. This is not a huge volume play in the very beginning because you're going to take that single podcast episode and you're going to get 15, 20 pieces of content out of it that you can utilize. So you don't need to be doing hundreds of podcast episodes in the very beginning. All you need to do is start with one a month. And you need to know who your target market is specifically. Put together your top 100 list, right? 100 of them, 25 maybe prospects, 25 influencers, 50, anywhere in between accounts you've been trying to get with and build a relationship with, and do the opposite of what most kind of, I would say, slimy podcasters, and this was a big topic of discussion as well. And something that's really bothered me with so many more people launching podcasts for their business nowadays is to start or to avoid, just using the podcast as a way to get in front of someone and then pitch them. I mean, like, come on, build a relationship, build trust. Okay. They will find out what you do and you're going to give them such a great experience. They may ask. And there's certain questions that you can pose to understand what's important to that person. If you are interviewing a prospect, for example, there's certain questions you can pose to find out what's important to them, what's not important. And maybe not, your offering, your service aligns with that, but you don't want to go out of your way and ruin the relationship by just trying to make it transactional in your podcast. So hope that was helpful. Big shout out to CMO Alliance. Go check them out. They have a free Slack channel with thousands of CMOs, B2B marketers that you can connect up with. We do a lot of these free sessions. I'm non-biased. I'm not a part of the actual organization. I've simply just helped to host some of their sessions. And I thought this was a really great one and great topic to come in and share with all of you on the podcast. Again, keep an eye out. We have some great interviews coming out with some very, very high level marketers, CMOs. So keep an eye out for that. This is B2B Mentors. Much love to you, my friends. Make it great. And